They tortured, killed, and ruled through fear until the same fate found them. In the cartel world, allies vanish overnight and enemies wait in silence. The power, the soldiers, the money, none of it matters when the trap finally closes around you. Because in their game, everyone pays, the only question is when. And sometimes the end comes fast, engines roaring, doors slamming, and a man realizing too late, they've come for him. Rolando Lopez Salinas, San Pedro Garza Garcia, a name that usually evokes wealth, calm, and the quiet comfort of safety. The city sits just outside Monterrey, one of Mexico's richest enclaves, where businessmen and politicians rub shoulders under the soft hum of streetlights. Violence feels distant there, something that happens elsewhere, in the darker corners of the country. But on the evening of September 4th, 2018, that illusion was destroyed. Witnesses remember it clearly. Multiple vehicles rolled into a high-end neighborhood, engines humming low and steady. They didn't look like police, but they moved like them. Fast, organized, decisive. Within moments, the convoy cut off a car at an intersection. Doors opened, and masked men stepped out, weapons raised, faces hidden behind black fabric. Their target was Rolando Lopez Salinas, known in the underworld as El Rolis or El Ocho, a man who had walked both sides of Mexico's cartel power struggle. He had deep connections inside the Gulf cartel, and whispers tied him to the remnants of the Beltran Leyva organization, one of the old empires of blood that had once challenged even Sinaloa itself. To some, he was a negotiator, a man who could bridge factions, move shipments, and make peace where others only made war. But to others, he was a traitor, a double agent who had sold information to the wrong people. In that world, perception is everything. And once someone decides you've switched sides, there's no trial, no warning. There's only the van. The abduction happened in seconds. Witnesses described it like a coordinated military operation, clean, silent, and terrifying. They forced El Rolis from his car, pushed him into one of their vehicles, and vanished into the streets. The entire thing was over before most people even realized what had happened. That night, San Pedro fell into uneasy quiet. People talked, in whispers, in bars, behind locked doors, but no one said much publicly. In a city built on appearances, no one wanted to admit that a cartel-style kidnapping had unfolded in plain sight. But the message was already spreading. Someone powerful had just been taken. For 11 days, there was nothing. No videos, no messages, no ransom. Just silence. The kind of silence that screams. When the underworld goes quiet, it means one of two things: a negotiation behind closed doors, or a death that's already happened. Then, on September 15th, authorities found him. A parking lot on the outskirts of the city. A black plastic bag. Inside it, the remains of El Rolis. His body bore unmistakable signs of torture, of prolonged suffering. He had been beaten, burned, shot multiple times. The message beside him was crude but clear, a warning written in pain. The writing, authorities said, pointed toward a rival faction, men who wanted to erase his influence and remind everyone who controlled the territory now. It wasn't random violence. It was theater, the kind the cartels specialize in. Each act meant to terrify, to humiliate, to reclaim power through fear. In life, El Rolis had balanced on the edge of two worlds, between the old power of the Beltran Leyva remnants and the shifting loyalties of the Gulf cartel's fractured leadership. In death, he became the latest casualty of that balance, proof that the game he played had no winners. Even after the case went cold, locals still spoke about it in low tones. The fact that it happened in San Pedro Garza Garcia, the safest city in Mexico, made it more than a cartel story. For men like El Rolis, power doesn't fade, it explodes. And every time it does, it sends shockwaves through rival territories, because when one name is erased, another steps forward and the cycle begins again, blood for blood, name for name. And soon, those gunshots would echo all the way to Culiacan, where even El Chapo's own blood wouldn't be spared. Edgar Guzman Lopez. Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa, where narco power doesn't hide in the shadows. It breathes in the open air. The city gleams with new money, narco mansions, and luxury cars. Yet beneath it all runs an unspoken truth. Every calm night exists only because someone powerful allows it to. It was May 8, 2008, a warm Thursday evening, the kind of night where nothing feels dangerous. Families wandered shopping centers, couples shared ice cream, and the city buzzed with ordinary life. But in Culiacan, ordinary can turn deadly in an instant. Witnesses remember the roar of engines, 3 vehicles speeding into the lot of a shopping center. The men inside didn't shout or flash badges, they just opened fire. AK-47s, dozens of them, a storm of bullets that lasted less than a minute but felt eternal to those nearby. When it was over, the echoes of gunfire still hung in the air. Smoke drifted across the asphalt, mingling with screams and shattering glass. Cars were perforated with bullet holes, concrete walls were scarred, and the ground, littered with hundreds of shell casings, over 500 in total. On that ground lay Edgar Guzman Lopez, son of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. He was just 22 years old, young, confident, already living under the armor of a last name that symbolized fear and respect across Mexico. But in that moment, even a name like Guzman couldn't protect him. For years, the Sinaloa cartel had been expanding, tightening its grip on the drug corridors that fed billions into its empire. But power attracts enemies, and betrayal festers in silence. Months before Edgar's killing, Alfredo Beltran Leyva, a powerful ally of El Chapo, had been captured by authorities. Inside the Beltran Leyva organization, the brothers believed it was no coincidence. They were convinced El Chapo had sold Alfredo out to protect his own empire. True or not, it didn't matter. In the narco world, trust doesn't need proof to break. So when Edgar was ambushed that night, everyone understood what it meant. This wasn't a random hit, it was a declaration, a message written in blood, spelling out the end of an era. In the hours after the attack, authorities and journalists descended on the scene. Cameras captured the chaos, bullet-riddled vehicles, bodies covered in sheets, pools of blood reflecting flashing police lights. Reporters whispered what officials wouldn't say out loud. This was the Beltran Leyva organization striking back. A son for a brother. The killing of Edgar Guzman Lopez sent shockwaves through the criminal landscape. It fractured the once iron alliance between Sinaloa and Beltran Leyva, igniting a cartel civil war that would scar Mexico for years. Cities like Culiacan, Mazatlan, and Navolato would become stages for revenge, ambushes, kidnappings, disappearances. The calm was gone, and in its place came a storm that no one could control. For Culiacan's people, the night left a wound that never healed. Locals say you could still see the bullet marks months later, and that the parking lot became an unspoken memorial. No one talked about it, but everyone remembered. Because that's what Culiacan does. It remembers the dead, especially when their last name is Guzman. At the funeral, silence said more than words. Security was tight, grief restrained. There were no speeches, no vows of vengeance. Only looks exchanged between men who didn't need to speak to know what came next. In the underworld, mourning is measured not in tears, but in bullets. Edgar's death became a symbol, not just of loss, but of vulnerability. It showed that even the most powerful bloodline could bleed, that even the son of El Chapo could be reached, surrounded, and erased in broad daylight. The balance of power had shifted. The alliance that once ruled Mexico's drug trade was now eating itself alive. And as Culiacan drowned in silence, the message was clear. The war for control had only begun. But far from Sinaloa, on another stretch of Mexican highway, another cartel leader was about to meet his own brutal fate. Not from rivals, but from the men he once called brothers. Samuel Flores Borrego. By 2011, the Gulf Cartel was no longer a single organization. It was an unstable alliance built on fear, mistrust, and decades of silent grudges. The old unity that once made it one of Mexico's most powerful cartels had vanished. In its place stood factions, Los Metros, Los Rojos, Los Lobos, each with its own commanders, soldiers, and ambitions. At the center of this internal storm was Samuel Flores Borrego, known to both enemies and allies as Metro 3. He wasn't the loudest or most flamboyant of the cartel's figures. Flores Borrego was methodical, calculating, and disciplined, a man who could switch from negotiation to bloodshed without hesitation. To his men, he was loyal. To his rivals, merciless. To his enemies, unpredictable. From his base in Reynosa, he controlled key trafficking routes between Tamaulipas and Monterrey, corridors that funneled cocaine, weapons, and money. These routes were the veins of the cartel's empire, and Metro 3 was the man who kept them flowing. But power in the cartel world is borrowed, never owned. And as Metro 3's influence grew, so did resentment. In the years leading up to his death, the Gulf Cartel had been bleeding from the inside. The split with Los Zetas, their former military arm turned rival, had triggered a series of internal fractures. Commanders questioned each other's loyalties, soldiers defected, and alliances that once seemed eternal began to crumble. Metro 3's leadership of the Los Metros faction placed him at odds with another powerful group, Los Rojos, a faction led by commanders who resented both his authority and his proximity to the cartel's remaining old guard. The conflict simmered quietly at first. Intercepted shipments, missing money, false rumors whispered into the right ears. But by late 2011, the quiet had become unbearable. And on September 2nd, 2011, silence gave way to murder. A white pickup truck was found abandoned on the highway between Reynosa and Monterrey. Inside were two bodies. One belonged to a local police officer, an associate, perhaps a shield, perhaps a warning. The other was unmistakable, Samuel Flores Borrego. His body told the story of his final hours. He hadn't been killed in a quick ambush. He had been interrogated, tortured, broken. There were signs of severe beating, bruises, deep cuts, and finally, gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Next to him, a handwritten message, a narco-mensaje, left no doubt this was personal. It wasn't about territory, it was about betrayal. Authorities who arrived on the scene described it as execution style. Those within the cartel didn't need an investigation, they already knew. The whispers said Los Rojos had done it. Some said it was revenge for past betrayals. Others believed he had been accused of siding with the wrong commanders, trying to centralize power at the expense of his peers. In a world where paranoia is oxygen, even suspicion can become a death sentence. When news of his death spread through Reynosa, chaos followed. The Los Metros faction exploded in rage, launching open war against Los Rojos. Streets turned into battlefields. Entire cities were locked down as convoys of armed men roamed freely, ambushing rivals, burning safe houses, blocking highways. Civilians hid inside their homes as the sound of gunfire echoed through the night. The Gulf Cartel, once feared as one of Mexico's most disciplined organizations, was now eating itself alive. Metro 3's death wasn't just the end of a man, it was the collapse of a structure. He had been one of the few figures capable of balancing fear and respect, of enforcing order without completely losing control. Without him, the cartel became a beast without a head, violent, unstable, unpredictable. And in a way, that was the message his killers wanted to send, that no one was untouchable, that no name was safe, and that power had changed hands. In the weeks that followed, hundreds of bodies would fall across Tamaulipas as revenge bled into revenge, and command structures dissolved into chaos. The once united Gulf Cartel splintered into fragments, each claiming the throne of a kingdom that no longer existed. For those who had known Samuel Flores Borrego, his death marked a grim truth. The most dangerous enemy isn't always across the border. Sometimes it's sitting beside you at the same table. And while the Gulf Cartel tore itself apart far to the west, Sinaloa was also unraveling. El Chapo was behind bars, the throne was empty, and in the scramble to fill it, another trusted name, a man once seen as untouchable, was about to meet a fate just as brutal. Manuel Alejandro Aponte Gomez. By 2014, the Sinaloa cartel stood on the edge of chaos. For over a decade, it had been the most organized and dominant criminal machine in Mexico, a sprawling network run with military precision under Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. But in February of that year, El Chapo's arrest cracked the foundation. What had once been an empire began to fracture overnight. Into that power vacuum stepped men who had built their reputations under his rule. lieutenants, operators, and enforcers, who owed everything to the man now behind bars. Among them, one name carried more weight than most: Manuel Alejandro Aponte Gomez, better known as El Bravo. El Bravo wasn't a street-born gunman. He came from discipline, from structure. Before the cartel, he was said to have served in the Mexican military, and that background shaped everything about him. He didn't just enforce El Chapo's orders, he fortified them. He was the architect of the boss's security, the invisible wall between the most wanted man in the world and those trying to catch or kill him. Within Sinaloa, he was known simply as El Chapo's shadow. Wherever Chapo went, El Bravo was close. He arranged convoys, coordinated guards, and oversaw safe houses across the Sierra Madre. He was a man trusted with the details of survival, routes, names, movements, the kind of knowledge no one outside El Chapo's inner circle ever possessed. But when Chapo was captured in early 2014, that knowledge became both his armor and his curse. With their leader gone, Sinaloa's balance shattered. Old rivalries resurfaced, and loyalties that had once seemed absolute began to shift like sand. Factions formed overnight, one behind Ismael El Mayo Zambada, another behind the Guzman family, and smaller groups led by ambitious lieutenants who saw an empire up for grabs. In the middle stood El Bravo, too powerful to ignore, too connected to trust. In the weeks after Chapo's arrest, he reportedly tried to restore order, visiting rural enclaves, re-establishing contact between commanders, reminding them of the old discipline that had once held everything together. But as he moved through Sinaloa, the whispers followed. Some said he was building his own faction. Others claimed he was protecting Guzman's family against El Mayo's men. And in a world built on paranoia, whispers are more dangerous than bullets. On April 9th, 2014, his story ended on a quiet road near La Cruz de Elota. Authorities found a body dumped by the roadside, wrapped, beaten, unrecognizable at first glance. The face was shattered, the hands were bound. He had been tortured, interrogated, and finally shot multiple times. When they confirmed the identity, it sent shockwaves through Sinaloa. El Bravo was dead. There was no message this time, no banner, no signature, no claim of responsibility. But everyone understood the silence. His death wasn't meant to intimidate. It was meant to erase, to remove one of the last men who truly knew how the empire worked. To this day, speculation remains divided. Some believe it was a revenge killing, orchestrated by rivals who blamed him for past betrayals. Others point inward, to Sinaloa itself, suggesting he had been eliminated by his own people, seen as too close to a fallen king, too aware of the network's deepest secrets. What's certain is that El Bravo's death marked the beginning of a purge. In the months that followed, bodies of former lieutenants and commanders began appearing across Sinaloa, Durango, and Sonora, men who, like him, had once sworn loyalty to Chapo. The old order was gone, and what replaced it was chaos, a cold, quiet struggle for control beneath the surface of Mexico's most powerful cartel. El Bravo had lived and died by a soldier's code, loyal to one man, bound to one purpose. But when that man was taken, his loyalty became a liability. He was the embodiment of a dying generation. The last of the soldiers who served the old bosses before the cartel became a business run by families, factions, and fear. In life, he had built the walls that kept his empire alive. In death, those same walls closed around him, and as his body was buried under the Sinaloa sun, a truth echoed across the cartel world. In this game, even the most disciplined soldier eventually becomes a target. Because in the end, power in Mexico's underworld doesn't pass down. It consumes. And El Bravo's fall proved one last brutal lesson. When the king is gone, even his shadow is hunted. But a decade earlier, a man born into cartel royalty, raised in wealth, protected by legacy, and still gunned down under the glow of cinema lights. Because in the world of cartels, even the golden ones don't live to see the credits roll. Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes, Culiacan, September 11th, 2004. A Saturday night like any other. Families at the movies, the sound of laughter spilling from open doors, headlights sliding over polished cars. In that brief moment, the city felt calm, peaceful, but peace in Culiacan never lasts long. Walking through the parking lot that night was Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes, known across Mexico's underworld as El Niño de Oro, the Golden Boy. The nickname wasn't just about his wealth, it was about his lineage. He was born into cartel royalty, the younger brother of Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the legendary Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies. Amado had built one of the largest drug empires in history, flying tons of cocaine into the United States aboard a private fleet of jets. When he died in 1997 during plastic surgery, the myth of his power outlived him, and his brothers, Vicente and Rodolfo, inherited not just his fortune but his enemies. Rodolfo was different from his brother. Where Amado ruled with intimidation and fear, Rodolfo preferred subtlety, the businessman of the family. He avoided bloodshed when possible, preferred negotiation to violence, and dressed like a banker rather than a narco. He was calm, strategic, the kind of man who believed that the Carrillo legacy could survive without endless war. But in a world built on violence, calm can look like weakness. That night, as Rodolfo and his wife left a cinema complex in Culiacan, a convoy pulled into the lot. The cars moved slowly, deliberately, not the reckless kind of men out for chaos, but professionals executing a plan. Witnesses said the shooters stepped out with precision, faces hidden, weapons raised. No words, no warning, just the sudden flash of automatic gunfire. The first bursts cut through the quiet like lightning. Two of Rodolfo's bodyguards went down instantly. His wife screamed as bullets tore through the car doors. The attack lasted seconds, short, brutal, merciless. When it was over, Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes lay dead beside his luxury vehicle, the asphalt beneath him slick with blood. The attackers fled the scene and ran straight into chaos. Police roadblocks formed around the city. Gunmen clashed with officers on the outskirts. By sunrise, 5 assailants were dead, others arrested. But the message was already clear. This wasn't a robbery or a random hit. This was an execution. The question was who ordered it. Inside Mexico's criminal underworld, fingers immediately pointed toward one man, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. At the time, tensions between the Juarez cartel, led by the Carrillo Fuentes family, and the Sinaloa cartel had been growing quietly. The two groups had long shared roots, profits, and influence, but beneath that partnership, resentment festered, territories overlapped, profits were questioned, and trust, that fragile thread, had already begun to tear. Rodolfo's murder was the final rip. Killing El Niño de Oro wasn't just an attack on a man, it was an insult to a dynasty. He wasn't a foot soldier or a mid-level boss, he was a Carrillo, and for a family that had once ruled the skies, that meant war. Within days, whispers of retaliation spread across Chihuahua, Sonora, and Sinaloa. Juarez gunmen began targeting Sinaloa operatives. Safe houses burned, bodies appeared on highways. The quiet rivalry had exploded into one of Mexico's most infamous blood feuds, the Juarez-Sinaloa War. For years after, that single ambush would be remembered as the spark. It divided old alliances, destroyed balance, and set the stage for a cycle of revenge that still echoes across Mexico's narco landscape. Because when one cartel prince falls, another rises, and each carries the same curse. Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes had been raised to inherit a kingdom. He believed legacy could protect him, that his family name was enough to keep death at bay. But in the world he lived in, power doesn't respect bloodlines, it erases them. He was called the Golden Boy because everything he touched turned to profit. But that night, under the lights of a Culiacan parking lot, gold turned to blood. His death marked more than the end of a man, it marked the end of a generation. The old rules of the cartels, loyalty, honor, and hierarchy, died with him. From that moment on, power stopped being inherited. It was taken, ripped from whoever held it last. Because in Mexico's underworld, no matter the family name, no matter the legend, The fate of every king, every prince, and every golden boy is always the same.